Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Room. This is a show for trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. Um, as you may or may not remember, I am a clinical psychologist, and I am also the parent of an ADHD. Well, he was a child once, now he's an adult. Uh, and I probably learned more from that experience than I learned in grad school, frankly. So, I have been working with ADHD families, kids, adults, and so on for darn near 40 years now. And over that time, first of all, over that time, a whole bunch of research has been done. And we found out way more about ADHD than we used to know. You remember, well, you may not remember, but when I was in grad school, there was no such thing as ADD or ADHD. It was hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. And that there were a bunch of things that were wrong with that, including the fact that it assumed that this was something you outgrew. Now we know that no, you don't outgrow it, and it affects you throughout life. And towards the last probably 10 years of my practice, I've been seeing, maybe 20 years, come to think of it, I've been seeing a bunch of adults with ADHD. Basically, nobody else in my area diagnoses it. It's trickier because some of the overt stuff, the hyperactivity part of things, does in fact diminish over time. But there's still all the stuff with inattention, working memory, times lack of time sense, and so on. So it affects people, and it's when you work with people who have been putting up with ADHD symptoms and not knowing what they were, it's pretty emotional. Okay, I never know what I'm going to get when I tell them, yeah, you in fact do have ADHD, and you have a lot of it. You have a bunch of it, and sometimes they get sad. Oh, all the time I wasted. Sometimes they get angry. Why the heck didn't anybody take care of this when I was a kid? Um, and some of them, thankfully, a few anyway, are just grateful that at last they have a reason. They know that there is something wrong, and they've sort of had the feeling there was something wrong most of their lives, but they couldn't get anybody to properly evaluate and diagnose them. Anyway, but that's not exactly why I am talking today. Today, I want to talk about how research has indicated in a very powerful way that a whole bunch of the approaches that we used to teach for handling ADHD are just totally wrong. Okay, I wrote a book. Here it is. It's called ADHD Strategic Parenting. Okay, the deal is, and it's not that I'm such a military man or anything like that, it's that it's just the most economical way I could think of to uh, emphasize the differences. ADHD is a neurologic condition. Okay, it's the brain is different in an ADHD person than it is in a neurotypical. But however, most of the treatment approaches when I was, well, not when I was in grad school because we didn't really have treatment approaches because we didn't really have the diagnosis, but almost everybody was teaching some version of behavior modification. And if you're not familiar with what that means you punish the behavior you don't like and you reward the behavior you do like. Well, anybody with an ADHD kid knows that that gives you many, many more opportunities to punish than to reward. And it's also wrong. If ADHD is a neurologic condition, why would you punish it? That's like punishing a guy for limping. It doesn't make sense. And the again, the difference, the reason strategic seems to work, or it works for me, is because strategic is when you're thinking long term. If you want to look at it in terms of the military, tactics win you the battle, strategy wins you the war. And if you've ever had an ADHD kid, you know it's pretty close to a war kind of situation. But what you're looking for is you don't care really deep down whether or not he makes his bed or whether or not she gets her homework done that night. You care that they grow up and are reasonable adults. That maybe you'll look forward to them visiting and bringing the grandkids someday. That's what you're trying for. That's why I call that strategic. Okay? Tactical is you're just trying to win the battle. Tactical is you want to make darn sure he makes his bed today, right now. No ends, ifs, or buts. Okay, that is small thinking. And that'll cause you a lot of problems in the long term parenting of your ADHD child. That's why I wrote the book. Okay, and it takes a lot more work to be the parent of an ADHD child, as I'm sure all of you out there know. Okay, there's so much more to pay attention to. But the strategic thinker always focuses on this is a neurologic condition. So when I'm looking at a piece of behavior that I'm not very pleased with, is it caused by ADHD? And that's what you have to really be paying attention to. So being a strategic parent requires a lot more patience. It also requires a lot more observation ability. That is, you have to spend some time actually watching your child. I mean, I've raised 3 kids, and basically, I didn't have to pay that much attention to the first 2. It was just when my ADHD came along, that I had to start really paying attention. That started, I'll tell you a little story. He was, I don't know, he was still in diapers, and he was able to walk, but he wasn't real steady. I came into the family room, and we had one of these rocking chairs that has a high back, and somehow he was hanging off the back of that thing with one hand, sucking his thumb, and quite contented with the whole world. Matter of fact, so I said to start paying attention. So what I found out was he climbed into the seat of the rocker and then reached around the side with one hand and grabbed the top and then swung his leg over and then swung the other leg over until he was just hanging there. Which, of course, all I could think of was, fractured skull, dislocated shoulder, all kinds of things. But that's why you have to pay more attention to an ADHDer. If you don't, well, good luck is what I'm going to say, and just leave it at that. But you have to pay more attention. You have to look more at what they're doing. You have to also be able to see it coming. Okay, because their emotional regulation is not all that good, and they're in a frustrating world. They're in a world that wasn't designed for ADHD. And I think I've told you on several occasions that I read a study that suggested that an ADHD child gets 70 critical comments every day. So the world is not comfortable. They're frustrated. They have this neurologic condition that many people do not understand, perhaps most people, including even teachers. They don't understand, and they think it's a behavior problem. And I told you, that we were teaching until very recently, honestly, we were teaching that you do behavior modifications. Punish the bad behavior, you reward the good behavior. The huge problem with that is, first of all, it's not designed for a neurologic condition. And second of all, there's nothing that says how much is enough. Oh, I remember having one parent tell me that I think he was 11 years old, 11-year-old ADHD son was sleeping on the floor of his bedroom. He had a mattress, but the mattress was on the floor because they'd taken the frame out, and there was nothing in the room. There was, not a desk or anything. There was nothing in the room, and she'd also taken the door off of the room, and she was quite proud of herself. And I was quite appalled, actually. You've got to keep in mind, that's the other thing that you need to do as a strategic parent, is you have to understand what's going on. The world is frustrating for ADHD kids. They are not brain damaged, they are not retarded, but their brain doesn't work quite the way everybody else's brain works. And that causes a lot of problems. This, for an example, working memory. Working memory is the part of memory where you aren't trying to remember it forever. You're just trying to keep it in awareness till you get the job done. So if you tell your ADHD child to do three things, go up to your room, pick up the clothes off the floor, put away your clean clothes, put your toys in the chest. That's working memory. And you've just given him a task that he or she probably can't do. So you'll come up a half hour, 40 minutes later, and they will have done one thing, and they're playing video games, and they're wondering why you're upset. Because the rest of that stuff, the other two items you asked them to do, disappeared. And that's what a problem with working memory is. And that also affects them when they're older and they are having a job, and the boss is telling them to do three things, and they only get one of them done, and it just causes a lot of problems. And the same, well, there are just literally tons of things that cause difficulties for ADHD people in life. So when you see something, you come in, look at your kid, you can tell something's going on because you have been observing closely, and you can tell he or she's getting ready for some kind of a emotional response. What is going on? What has happened? How has the ADHD interfered in the situation? Is it because he forgot to turn in his homework again? Is it because he forgot to do his homework in spite of all your rules about doing it? There are, there are literally thousands of things that could be an issue. Is it because he got in trouble at school because he was trying to keep the retarded kid from being bullied at recess, but when the teacher intervened, he blew up at her? True story. That actually happened to my son. And he got punished, and the kids who were bullying the retarded child got nothing. So like I said, the world is not really set up for ADHDers. And so we, as the parents, have to be the ones who are understanding, who can tell what's going on, who know how to compare what's, what is happening in his or her life with the ADHD, and figure out, is that what's causing the problem? Is it the maybe talking out of turn? Is it because trying to organize stuff is so tough for them? Um, you have to know your stuff. You have to know what ADHD is. You have to know what the symptoms are. And you have to know how they show up in real life. And then you can respond appropriately. And appropriately usually is going to be something a little more subtle than just punishment. And I'm not saying you don't have limits and all that stuff, because you really have to do that. But you don't want to be in the position that you're punishing a neurologic condition. Okay? That's, if you really think about that, that is absurd. Excuse me. And that will not do any good. I mean, what you see a lot of, honestly, is adults who have had ADHD their whole life but have never been treated. They either get real depressed and think they're worthless, stupid, something like that, or they get real frustrated and angry and think everybody's against them. You really don't want that for your kid, and it's really unnecessary. I mean, there's nothing about ADHD that means they can't, with real careful help, uh, have reasonably successful lives. We've got tons of examples out there of people with ADHD who are successful. Of course, most of them are entrepreneur types. They've started their own business, and but you have to encourage that. You can't insist that they follow the rule, because that may not fit them. Your ADHD child well, maybe we'll go to Harvard, but that doesn't really matter that much. What with internet classes and all that stuff, it is not as important as it used to be. But they do better if they are doing something they're interested in. They really have a hard time if they are being forced to do stuff they're not interested in. So just remember that, and they can still be successful. It's not, they're not going to fail just because they don't get into the best college. But they can fail if they don't think they're a good human being, and they don't trust people, and they aren't so sure about whether mom and dad love them. Okay? All right. I went a little longer than I had planned to, but it's really important. Strategic thinking, those are the parents that observe, that are patient, and understand ADHD and what it looks like in real life. So I will catch you next time. Please, post a comment, leave me a little message if you've got something you'd like me to talk about. If you'd like to, make a comment on what you just heard, please do so. It helps me. I've been doing this for a little over 5 years now. And sometimes it's kind of hard to have a topic, but I do this because I believe in it, and I want to help as many people as I can. And I think it's kind of my obligation, duty, whatever, to give something back. So, not getting all schmaltzy or anything, but I will catch you next time. Same time, same place. We'll see you next week. Bye.